Hello everyone, thank you for joining me here today for our virtual event, which is part of a series of virtual events in honor of Waste Reduction Week in Canada. Today I'm going to be showing you how to darn a sock or fix holes in your socks that might have them. For this activity, you will need a few different items, including a rounded or sturdy object. We'll put our sock onto this object as a way to keep the fabric in place. You can purchase something called a darning egg or a mushroom, which is an object specifically created for this purpose. However, it is very likely you have an object at home that will work equally as well. Perhaps a light bulb, a ball, etc. Today I'll be using a hand weight. You'll also need socks with holes or socks that need to be fixed, scissors, a needle. If you have one, it's recommended you use a darning or embroidery needle for this project. You'll need thread, the thickness of which might vary depending on the sock you need to repair. For example, you might want to use a thin cotton thread for a thin cotton sock, or a thicker thread or yarn for a wool sock. I'll be using embroidery thread simply because it's what I have on hand, and also I like the funky colors and texture the embroidery thread lends. I don't have one, but if you do, you might also want to use a thimble. Our first step will be putting our sock over top of our darning object and flattening out the fabric so that it has pretty well equal tension all the way around our hole. We'll also want to thread our embroidery needle, and the amount of thread you'll need is going to depend on how large your hole is. So I have a fairly large hole in my sock. I'm going to use somewhere around 40 inches of embroidery thread. However, I wouldn't recommend this if you have a smaller hole, simply because the more thread that you are working with, the harder it is to control the thread. Once you've put your thread through the needle, you're going to take both ends of the embroidery thread and tie them together using a small knot. Next, we'll enter our needle into the bottom edge of fabric around the hole of our sock. We're going to begin sewing by making long stitches or running stitches across the entirety of the hole. So these stitches are going to go vertically or up and down across the hole of the sock. And as we're sewing, we want to try to keep a fairly even tension across the entire hole. So you are tugging a little bit, but not too much so that you're closing the hole up. When you've completed your stitches across the hole and you've reached the weak edge of fabric, you're going to tie off your thread with a knot. Make sure you leave a few inches of string before you cut the thread so that you can weave that thread into the pattern later on. For this next step, I'm going to use a different color of thread. However, you can use a matching thread if you prefer. So I've threaded my needle with my second color. I've taken the two ends and tied them in a knot. And now I'm ready to begin with the next step of this project. I'm going to turn the hole in my sock so that the green stitches are now running horizontal, and I'll be sewing vertically with the purple thread. We're going to enter our needle into the sock, and we're actually going to be weaving the purple thread over and under the green thread. We'll start by going under the first two strands of green, then over the next 2 strands of green. Under the next 2 strands of green, over the next 2 strands of green. And you're going to do this until you reach the edge of the hole. Now we're going to go back the other way, however, we'll be weaving oppositely to what we just did. So if you went under the green strands, you're going to go over the green strands. And if you went over the green strands, you're going to go under the green strands. We're going to do this all along that first purple thread until we reach the end of the sock, and we can also kind of push the purple threads in towards each other to keep our weave nice and taut. Continue weaving the purple thread over and under the green thread and oppositely to the purple thread that came before it until you've filled the entire hole. On your last stitch, you'll make another overhand knot with your purple thread to finish it off. Our hole is patched, and all that's left to do is weave in the loose ends. Once you've woven your loose ends into the inside of your sock, you can tie a couple of overhand knots and trim them up. Turn your sock right side out, and you are done.